Hello, and welcome to The Joy of CX. I'm David Cox, and so far in the last few episodes, we've talked about the journey towards customer centricity. We've talked about what customer experience really is, why we should care about it, and what triggers organizations to focus on customer centricity. Then we talked through the journey businesses need to go on in order to truly put the customer at the heart. And now in this episode, what I really wanted to do was just to take some time to explore what that journey translates into in terms of outcome, in terms of success. What can it do for the business, the numbers, the bottom line? And also to take some time to think about the key success factors that will enable us to get there. So if we're talking about overall success, I think probably the easiest way to illustrate this is by looking at a real life example. We're going to look at the example of a mobile operator I worked with a few years back called Nextel in Brazil. Just to set the scene, this was a mobile operator that operated across Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Just as a quick aside, I know that might sound like a relatively small market, but in actual fact, just across those two cities, they had a potential customer base of somewhere in the region of 30 million customers, around the entire population of Australia. And when I first started working with Nextel, they'd gone way past the midlife crisis, and they were essentially in terminal decline. By way of background, they were a company that had been very successful in the early noughties. They'd had some proprietary technology that made them very cool and aspirational during that time, but the technology had become obsolete, and they were now a kind of Me Too mobile operator, competing with the big boys in a crowded market and struggling badly. They were hemorrhaging customers, cutting costs in that, unfortunately, very familiar terminal death spiral. So we embarked on a customer-led turnaround, applying all of the practices we've talked about across the episodes in this podcast to both stem the tide as well as to start to stimulate growth. We focused on fixing the basics, getting rid of all the things that were annoying customers. In other words, removing all of the reasons for customers to leave. And then we moved on into building connection and creating genuine reasons for new customers to come to us and want to stay. And the results were nothing short of spectacular. In 2 years, pretty much all of the key metrics of the business had completely turned the corner. The NPS score more than doubled from a sector-lagging 14 to a market-leading 40. Complaints were down by over 50%, and the contact rates of the call centre dropped from 50% to 30%. More importantly, though, customer churn rate more than halved from over 4% a month to under 2%. The net adds, the number of new customers in a quarter minus the churn, increased by a whopping 400%, and the business returned to healthy profitability. On top of all of that, our people became so inspired and engaged by what they were part of that the employee satisfaction index grew from 65% to over 90%, even in the face of significant downsizing and job losses. So we achieved some radically improved business metrics that were a direct result of focusing on eliminating pain and starting to create reasons to stay. And those reasons to stay were grounded in a complete pivot of focus from a slightly aspirational high-end target customer focus towards a very deliberate focus on the base of the pyramid. We refocused on the lower end segment who felt largely forgotten and underappreciated in society, who led very tough lives, and we built a positioning around the core belief that everybody deserves the chance to succeed in life. And the long and the short of all of this is that in a 2-year period that we went through the transformation, we went from a position of staring death in the face, from being 3 or 4 months away from game over, from the money running out, through to becoming the fastest growing telecoms operator in Brazil. And even more importantly, we were doing that with the lowest marketing spend of all our competitors. In the telecoms industry, traditionally, growth is directly proportional to advertising spend. But we showed that there was another way of achieving results simply by focusing on what mattered to customers. So this leads us to a key question. If this is the scale of what can be achieved by doggedly following a customer-led strategy, what are the keys to success? What is it that needs to be in place to be able to deliver these kinds of results? From my experience, the most fundamental element that needs to be in place is a leadership team, and more specifically a CEO as leader of that team, who genuinely believe that customer centricity is the route to delivering sustainable long-term business success. we're talking about going beyond a general sense that treating customers well is good for business, we should always strive to do better, and into a knowing deep in their bones that customer centricity is not just an element of the strategy, it's not a bolt-on, an optional extra, it is the core of the strategy. It's the foundation of the strategy on which everything else can be built. And if you're starting with that core belief in the bones of the leader, as we did in Nextel, then all you need to do is follow the path and the results will flow. But having said that, there are some lessons that I've uncovered over the years, some kind of do's and don'ts that do help to make the journey more effective. I've touched on some of them as we talked through the approach in previous podcasts, but I thought it was worth taking a bit of time here just to summarize what I think are the real enablers of success. I think the first thing to talk about here is the approach of going step by step, letting the journey unfold bit by bit, just revealing the next chapter in the story. I've discovered that if you try to set the entire journey out from the beginning, talking about building differentiation, creating the love, fixing the culture right from the beginning, then you can easily lose everyone on day one. It can sound like a fairy tale, a bit of consultant's BS, or at the very least, something that's too big to ever become a reality. So even though you may have the clearest vision of the journey, the roadmap in your head, there's no reason to share it all, to paint it for everyone on day one. Just get on with measuring dissatisfaction at each moment in the journey and building a dashboard of customer pain points that you can deliver into the organization. Give them something tangible that will allow the organization to start to associate CX with something that's practical, useful, even common sense. And only once that's been assimilated, integrated, and digested do you start to talk about the next step. And I think that brings me on to the next enabler of success, which is to make sure that you demonstrate and deliver improvement quickly. Show that customers are getting happier, show that churn rates are coming down, show that your contact rates are falling. Focus on delivering real results, not on grand visions. The results build to the vision, not the other way around. And one of the key tricks of the trade here is to start by finding an area in the organization that's most in tune with what you're trying to do, that has a natural affinity with the approach, and work with them to get momentum. In many organizations, this is often the customer care area. They're more used to thinking about customer being measured on satisfaction metrics and so on. So it's often a good idea to start here, get some quick results, make them the role models for the rest of the organization, the hero area that others will want to follow and emulate. So get some progress in the get help moment before moving on to the more naturally defensive areas, typically the technology areas that support the use moment and who tend to be much more tech-centric than customer-centric. The other success enabler that's very related to getting quick momentum is something that we've mentioned in a couple of earlier episodes. The recognition that so much of what needs to be changed as we go through our journey, either fixing the pain or by starting to create a differentiated experience, is changing the way that we communicate with customers. So simply by changing the script in the contact center, or even doing away with scripts altogether, or changing the tone of voice and message in our marketing comms, we can deliver results that impact the bottom line very quickly and very easily. It doesn't have to need big systems projects to revamp operational processes to make a big impact. So being open to and prioritizing messaging changes should always be a key point of focus to deliver improvement and deliver it fast. Moving on into how to drive things from an organizational point of view, and specifically the role of a CX function in driving this, there are a couple of key things that I've learned. Firstly, the main focus of the CX function should always be about enabling the rest of the organization to be successful, rather than being about policing on one end of the spectrum or being solely responsible for delivering change at the other end. The CX function's job is to feed the operational areas with the information, the insight, the perspective that they need for them to take up the mantle themselves, to shape, change, improve their own operations. It's to be the bridge between the customer and the operations, to enable that fluid conversation that means that doing the right thing for customers, understanding their pain and getting rid of it, becomes something natural and organic right across the business. The most important thing is to create a pull from the business, to create a desire from within the organization to improve, and then the job of the CX function is simply to enable that, to set the right guide rails, to feed the right insight, to create the right governance, where the march towards true customer centricity becomes an inevitable consequence, and possibly one that people are not even necessarily conscious of. It becomes simply a part of the way we manage our business without anyone really needing to drive it. And this leads to a final point that I wanted to touch on, which is, what is the key to the building of a successful CX function? One that's going to have the best chance of guiding the organization along the transformation journey and delivering on the goal of customer centricity. There are a couple of points to touch on here. Firstly is the issue of independence. Where I've seen this being most successful is where the CX function is independent of the operation of the business, not part of the customer service function, not part of the marketing team, but maintaining an independence that allows them to act as a bridge between the sometimes conflicting challenges and objectives of the different areas. Ideally, to really demonstrate the importance of the customer to the organization, you want your CX function to be under the direct control of the CEO, possibly in a kind of chief customer officer type of role. And in terms of the makeup of the CX team, the absolute golden rule is quality over quantity. This is not about muscle, it's not about body shopping, it's not about pushing and driving the organization to deliver change. It's primarily about leadership and influence. It's more about setting direction and steering than execution. So we're talking about creating a small, crack team that's able to influence across an organization, both at the highest levels as well as right down in the trenches. Individuals who command respect and that people are happy to listen to follow, because they demonstrate a combination of clear sense of purpose, business acumen, and common sense. Investing in building this small, crack team, ideally from respected people from within the organization, will massively increase the chances of success, of delivering the sort of transformation we spoke about across the episodes in this podcast, of being able to take a company like Nextel from its death throes through to being the fastest growing in the sector in the space of 2 years. So having looked back over my experience over the last 20 years or so, having shared some of my learnings and experiences, before we finally wrap up, what I wanted to do then was to start to look forwards. Whilst a lot of what we talked about might fall into the category of eternal truths, clearly the world is changing, and particularly in the world of technology. And very specifically, what is hurtling towards us, if it's not already arrived, are the opportunities that come with artificial intelligence. I recognise we've been through several hours of talking about customer experience and customer centricity, and I'm not entirely sure I've mentioned AI even once. So I think it's important that we focus a little bit on what the opportunities are that I see going forwards that AI can bring. I don't think it'll become as a massive surprise that I wouldn't hold myself up as a technology soothsayer, but for me I think there's 3 big categories here that we need to explore a little bit. The first and most obvious thing that's well underway already is the opportunity to make the delivery of customer service cheaper and more effective. So we're talking simply about using AI to replace customer service agents. Every business in the world is already somewhere on this path. And the focus, the initial opportunity here, is obviously one of driving lower cost. AI agents are always going to be cheaper than human beings, but it's also one of effectiveness. AI agents probably make fewer mistakes, and more importantly, are more available to customers. You can do away with queues and irritating music and tedious scripts and all that kind of stuff. I'm not sure I'm going out on too much of a limb here in making the prediction that AI will do away with contact centers altogether. And clearly, for businesses, there's a huge amount of opportunity there. But equally, from the customer centricity perspective, I'm not so sure that it will make a huge amount of real difference to the customer. Replacing or being able to mimic a customer service agent effectively and more cheaply has some benefit to customers in that you can talk to someone more quickly, they don't require so much training, they'll probably give you a quicker and better answer. But it doesn't really do much to improve that human connection that really underpins the differentiated experience. It's very much in the fix the basics category, part of delivering functional excellence that we talked about in episode 4. The second big category, I think, is the ability to identify, understand, and remove the root causes of customer pain points. In episode 4, we talked about the process of reaching out to customers, understanding what their issues are, tracking that through to root cause, and then fixing that root cause problem. This whole process in most organizations is still a relatively human, mechanical, person-driven analysis process. But what I'm already seeing is a lot of technologies becoming available that are using AI to gather data and proactively identify and correct pain points, often before the customers even become aware of them themselves. We're no longer having to rely on customers to tell us that they're annoyed. We can find signatures of that pain in the data and, more importantly, track that through to root cause and fix it proactively. What this will do is massively speed up the journey to functional excellence. It's still important to get the insight from customers in the first place as to what most irritates them, but being able to spot the root causes, automate the detection of symptoms, and proactively correct will deliver much faster improvements. Having said that, what it will also do is make it harder and harder to use just doing a good job, always meeting customer expectations and so on as a differentiating factor, even temporarily. Getting things right first time will increasingly become the norm. So again, the emphasis will shift towards the emotional connection being the key to creating a differentiated experience. And here it's possibly less clear to see what role AI will play. One area where it might play a significant role is in the final aspect that AI is currently unlocking, which is the opportunity to move further and further towards micro-segmentation. What I mean by that is the ability to tune the experience that a customer receives to their particular personality and needs. And AI gives the opportunity to finally deliver an experience that's tuned to an almost individual customer level. With traditional segmentation models, you divide your customer base into several segments, often using a simple customer value-based model, and then codify the experience that each segment receives from each area of the organization. How they're treated in the call center, what offers they receive, and so on. But each segment you create implies additional costs, separate teams in the contact center, monitoring and reporting routines, and so on. So every time you create a segment, you're multiplying the cost for delivering a tuned experience to that segment, and you're creating more complexity in your organization to deliver that. My sense is that with AI, we will start to have the opportunity to deliver segmented experiences tuned to micro segments, both more efficiently and at lower cost. We'll not only be able to identify on an automated basis from our data which customer sits in which micro segment, but also to deliver a tuned experience to those customers. We will easily be able to treat some customers more formally than others, or to talk to tech-savvy customers in one language and late adopters in another. We'll be able to know what matters to each and every customer and to use that to deliver a subtly tweaked experience that will resonate most with them as an individual. But always, and I think this is an important point, remembering that even though we have micro-segmented differences in the way that we deliver to customers, the principles that the business stands for, that why they exist for customers, and the core principles we want customers to recognize in them, the overall personality, should stay the same for all customers, just delivered in a way that is more meaningful for each customer. So I think those are the three aspects where I can see AI making a difference in the foreseeable future. But as I said before, I'm clearly not in the business of making predictions, and I'm sure there'll be many other opportunities opening up down the road. The aim of this podcast is not to focus on technology and the opportunities that it will bring. I think that one of the things I've learned over the course of the last 20 years is that the most fundamental thing that we're trying to achieve is to have absolute clarity on what we need to do to deliver something of value for customers. And technology is nothing more than an enabler of that. So the focus of everything we've talked to up until now is on getting the ideas right and getting the essence of what we're trying to achieve clear, so that we can harness the power of technology to deliver that rather than being led by it. We're trying to avoid falling into that trap that a lot of businesses fell into a few years back, of thinking that digital was the answer to everything without ever really understanding what the question was. Digital is the solution. Now, what was the question? We need to have absolutely clear what we're trying to achieve, and then we can see how we can use the advantages of AI to deliver that. So I think the key message looking forward is hold on to your principles. It's those principles that will deliver the sustainable long-term growth, and use technology to get there faster and more effectively. So with that, we're coming to the end of our journey together through what I've learned over the last 20 years. We've examined what customer experience really is, why businesses should care about it, and what embracing customer centricity can deliver to the sustainable growth and profitability of a business. And we talked through the path for getting there, the 3 pillars or phases that form the foundation, and how to go about delivering them. If you've made it this far, apart from deserving some kind of medal for listening to my dulcet tones over the last few episodes, I hope that I've managed to share some of my learnings and experiences, and there have been a couple of nuggets in there that you've been able to take away. Going forward in future episodes, what I'm now going to do is to open this out so that we can talk to some of the fascinating people that I've met along the way, to talk about their experiences and their perspectives. We're going to cover the experiences of CEOs, CX directors and the like who've been through the transformation journey, as well as talking to some remarkable people from adjacent fields to understand how CX transformation can dovetail with wider marketing, branding, operations disciplines. So we'll leave it there for today. Many thanks for listening, and I hope to see you soon.